Pope Francis' shock, untidy appearance in the Vatican. Was it intentional? There is zero of the papal accoutrement. He's just in a poncho in a wheelchair greeting people on his way to pray at the tomb of Pius X of all people.
I'm not going to make fun of the dying old man in a poncho.
Sure.
Just not going to do it. It is a test for a lot of people, and a lot of people are failing that with spectacular flying colors. I'm not comparing Pope Francis to Osama bin Laden. I know you could easily make the argument that someone who does to the church what he's done is, you can make the comparison. I'm not making that comparison. If you're dancing on the grave of a man who is still very much alive and needs your prayers, then there's something wrong, including the sudden cutting off of funding from the U.S. government to the Vatican. Liz Yore has said it's like an enormous amount, like some 60.
By the way, my name is Joe McClane. I host a radio program called A Catholic Take, where we look at the world through a Catholic lens. I'd love for you to hang out with us. If you like it, give it a thumbs up and let us know what you think in the comments below.
Praise be to God in all things. Dr. Anthony Stine is with us. Hey, there are some stories you covered this week that I want to get into, but I want to start with this story right here. Pope Francis' shock, untidy appearance in the Vatican. Was it intentional? Michael Haynes reporting this. I'm going to link to it in the show notes. The video is very interesting. I had flashbacks, Dr. Stine. He's sitting there in his wheelchair. There's no zacchetto, no pectoral cross. He doesn't wear the ring. Maybe his hands are swollen, fine. But what's that got to do with wearing the pectoral cross? I don't know. There is zero of the papal accoutrement. He's just in a poncho in a wheelchair greeting people on his way to pray at the tomb of Pius X of all people. That's amazing. But it kind of reminded me of the humble Bergoglio taking the bus ride to work in Argentina with a press person and a camera present. You know, did you think this was intentional?
I made a similar illusion. It reminded me of Archbishop or Cardinal Bergoglio dressing as a normal priest instead of as in his Episcopal attire, going out after hours to feed the homeless and that kind of thing. All the things that we found out about that made people like him early on. But I'm going to repeat what Rate Chaley said on X about this last night. I'm not going to make fun of the dying old man in a poncho.
Sure.
Just not going to do it.
Yeah.
There are people who, this stage of Pope Francis's life is a test for a lot of people, and a lot of people are failing that with spectacular flying colors. It could not be any more blatant. If your initial response to seeing a frail old man dying is good riddance, and sitting there applauding for his suffering, you might want to go to confession. You might need to do some introspection, because I am not a fan of Pope Francis and what he has done to the church, but I want him to be ready to meet our Lord.
Amen.
I want him to get all the graces he needs for that. And that's the same thing I would wish on that my enemies would have for me when my time comes. I cannot sit there and cheerlead for what he's going through. And it's what I did wonder, though, if he was making a political signal, although I didn't go with the he's not really Pope thing.
No,
if he's been reduced to a figurehead, that would be interesting.
Michael Haynes, in his article, which we're going to link to today in the show notes, he wonders whether or not this was an intended message for all of those that are lobbying for the next conclave. A message sent to the Curia, a message sent to the cardinals that he is alive and he is still here and he plans to stay. That was one of the points in Michael Haynes' article. What do you think about that?
No. I think that's probably true. I mean, I was talking this morning about the context of his appearance was active lobbying going on, and by both sides. And I'm starting to find it all, even like the faction that you would want to win a conclave. The Demos 2 stuff is starting to make my skin crawl. It really is, because Francis could be here for the next couple years, 5 years. I mean, honestly, statistically, men who deal with the things he's doing in his condition at his stage of life, they're not here for 5 years, but he could be. And it's the same reason that I get upset, kind of annoyed when people talk about, the Benedict XVI Munus versus Ministerium thing, and it gets down to the legalism when the papacy is a divine office. And it is absolutely appropriate that a pope should follow canon law and all the procedures and things. But how much does that bind a pope? and it's one of the perennial questions we have about the papacy we never get a clear answer to. And it's the same kind of thing where we start applying a materialistic worldly vision on this behavior. And again, I hope we get a, Gregory the 17th, Pius the 13th, Leo the 14th type pope from a cardinal nobody's ever heard of, been stuck out in the wilderness for 20 years or something, and is ultra traditionalist and is willing to crack heads when he comes in. But at the end of the day, it's a divine office, and whether the person who hasn't now got it through illicit means, or the person or is a chastisement, or maybe we're all just wrong and he's doing the will of God. I doubt the last one, but whatever it is, this is a test for people and how they're responding to this. And I'm very happy that the higher profile Catholic voices, yourself included, are not sitting there, playing the Benny Hill theme song, overlaying that footage of him in St. Peter's Basilica. There are a whole new crop of Catholic commentary YouTube channels who are hiding behind AI voices instead of being on camera and having AI. It's just disgusting. And it's reprehensible. It really is, the stuff that's going on. Have some restraint. Tell the truth about what's going on, but have some...
Exactly.
Have some decency. Please. It's Lent. Do you need to be reminded that we are a week from Good Friday? And then we enter the joyous season of Easter and then Pentecost. But now is the time of reflecting on your spiritual state. And if you're dancing on the grave of a man who is still very much alive and needs your prayers, then there's something wrong. Jesus commanded us to pray for our enemies. And it's a homily that I even heard about. Never heard the homily, but just the substance of it I heard about has stuck with me. It was a priest talked in passing about a homily he gave in 2002. And the 2002 is important for this one. And he asked his parishioners, do you pray for Osama bin Laden? You could have heard a pin drop, he said, in the parish. I'm not comparing Pope Francis to Osama bin Laden. I know you could easily make the argument that someone who does to the church what he's done is, you can make the comparison. I'm not making that comparison. I'm simply saying, if you are to pray for your enemies, as Christ told us, and bin Laden being a figure most of us today would admit to that being, then you should be praying for the man the world accepts as the vicar of Christ in his last days, even if you don't like him, and maybe especially if you don't like him, because it's an act of charity.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of hate for, by the way, saying this. My patience is wearing thin on this.
I am happy to see that he is doing better. I guess I'm just still confused, though, and I guess this was the point of Michael Haynes' article. This is typical Pope Francis politicking. I mean, what message is he trying to communicate by removing all of the vestments of the papal office? And by that, I don't mean like the vestments at liturgy, but the vestments of the Zeccato, the pectoral cross, the ring. There's zero. I get his hands may be swollen, but what's that got to do with the Zeccato? Like, he could put it on his head. He could have had the pectoral cross, and we'd have been like, okay, great. He's still convalescing. He's still not feeling well. Spur of the moment. We'd believe that. But that, coupled with the fact that two of his staff members don't have their jackets on, so they're also dressed down. The whole thing seems very intentional, which means Pope Francis is still on his game. He's still very much a very politically savvy player in all of this, and that is just the sign of the times.
He went back to Casa Santa Marta, and apparently he didn't tell anybody in Rome other than his most trusted people who got his suite ready for him, with all the medical equipment he'd need.
Yeah.
Because the day they announced that, Cardinal Fernandez, hours beforehand, the prefect for the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith, many popes have held that position over the centuries. He told Catholic media, we don't know when he's coming back. So
not communicating.
It's fair to speculate that there is some symbology here, because especially when you remember that the cardinal he met with the most, according to public reports, was Cardinal Pietro Parolin, who is apparently politicking to replace Francis, not like kick him out of office, but to have all the votes necessary to get the conclave done and over quick and neatly, to be that faction's candidate, to get the moderates on his side. And the broader context too.
Kind of morbid.
There are a number of things hanging over this conclave, including the sudden cutting off of funding from the U.S. government to the Vatican. Liz Yore has said it's like an enormous amount, like some 60-80% of their funding comes from the U.S. government through various NGOs. I mean, if you think about that for a second, I mean, this stuff is going to hang over them. And that's why I didn't find it coincidental at all that the financial state of the Vatican broke this week. 10 years ago.
Yeah, I want to get into that too.
It was confirmed that 10 years ago, Francis told the cardinals that they had €1.5 billion shortfall on their pension fund. And anybody who's ever been involved in any kind of organization will tell you it's not typically only one line item or one department that's having financial problems in an institution. It's usually the whole thing. It's usually varying levels. You go look at the U.S. government right now. When they shut the doors on USAID, people started saying you're going to find the same thing in Health and Human Services. Everybody knows about the Pentagon. I mean, that's the one thing everybody's talked about, needing an audit for 30 years. You got broad bipartisan support on the audit of the Pentagon. But the U.S. government's in the same kind of way. It's why they're taking such draconian action now on taking care of the problem. But it's an institution-wide problem in the Vatican. It goes a long way to explain the relationship with China if money was involved. It goes a long way to explain why the completely out of touch with reality cardinals in Rome decided that funding the biopic of Elton John, a musician who is what we would call a legacy musician now. He isn't exactly the most relevant figure, but he's famous. They funded the biopic of Rocket Man. They should have thought that funding a Hollywood movie is a bad idea in general under most circumstances. There might be exceptions. But what about Elton John? Might be in questionable taste at the same time that Ted McCarrick's foibles were coming out. And I'm not saying Elton John has ever been accused of that kind of thing. There's a lot of overlap, and we'll say their inclinations between the two men, and it's a really bad look. And on top of the other financial scandals from Rome, it explains all of it.
Here's the upside to that, though. Elton John and Madonna have reconciled. So, some good news. Silver lining, I suppose.
Reconciled with the church or with each other?
With each other. Not with the church. Not with the church.
Well, I'm happy for them.
Because you want more, and I want to give it to you. I'm rolling out a brand new membership program for the insiders of this channel. Join today. There's something for everyone. And because you could help me fund the next documentary film, the next book project, audio drama, audio narrations, and other projects that I have been dreaming to work on, but simply don't have the resources to accomplish. You and I together can do amazing things. You want more, and I want to give it to you.
What else was on your radar this week that stood out to you?
I'm finding fascinating what you were talking about before I came on with the secular protests and things. Long before I was a Catholic, I was like a center-left secularist, dodging the big existential metaphysical questions. And it's remarkable now that the left is defending the World Trade Organization. Are you old enough to remember the Battle of Seattle? I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I remember that. I'm from Portland, not Seattle, but man.
The only battle in Seattle I remember was the Occupy Seattle thing in 2020.
Oh, the World Trade Organization protests back in like 2000, 2001. Right after that, George W. Bush came to Portland, and there were Antifa throwing acid-filled light bulbs and things, all because they were against free trade. And now they're defending free trade. I'm just flabbergasted at how this has all happened. And I see lately you're having now priests giving homilies talking about how Elon Musk is the bad guy because when someone think of the bureaucrats, and you have the U.S. bishops surrendering now, surrendering on immigration. And it's a safe bit of speculation to think that this sudden turnaround from them, because they're not going to stop doing this. I suspect two things happened. The first is that somebody from the U.S. government, I don't know what agency, may have been from the White House. It could have been J.D. Vance privately, for all we know, meeting with Broglio and Prevost and the other highest ranking USCCB officials, telling them, you need to stop. Otherwise, we're going to investigate the USCCB. And you don't want the U.S. government investigating the USCCB. And they probably had this because it's a double-edged sword. Because what would it look like if the federal government were suddenly going after the U.S. bishops? It would look really, really bad for the administration. But at the same time, what kind of things would come out? What do you think the U.S. government has on the U.S. bishops? They probably have a lot. I mean, all the sexual predator stuff, I'm sure there's stuff that they've never made public about that. I mean, and so some conversation was had between high-ranking officials on each side saying, you need to back off and we will leave this alone. We won't investigate your human trafficking, that you facilitate human trafficking. You have on your websites and you have your people out there telling people how illegal aliens, how to break the law in violation of church teaching, by the way. They do that.
Yeah.
And so the bishops probably, on top of that, had another conversation, probably with someone else, to come up with some way of making up for some of the shortfall of the funding to help facilitate this, because they're not going to stop.
And they have a history of it too. We had Mike McCormick on this week, and he reiterated the connection between Joe Biden, the Obama-Biden administration, and Theodore McCarrick, how the man was being sent all over the world by the federal government to do their bidding. And there's great speculation. Of course, Mike McCormick thinks so. He was a White House stenographer. He wrote a couple of books on the subject. He definitely thinks that McCarrick was a CIA asset working for the State Department and the USAID efforts. So, I mean, there is a background. And now there's a call for a RICO investigation. Father Gomolka, Rachel Master-Giacomo, Janet Smith, others are calling for a RICO investigation for Cardinal, what's his name, in Washington, D.C. now. And so, what's his name? Why his name escape? Thank you. I don't know why his name escaped me all of a sudden. It's Friday, I suppose. McElroy. And that's something you also covered this week.
Yeah. It's very clear that McElroy is now the point person for the USCCB on dealing with the administration. That seems to be the only thing I ever see him talking about in the media and with the media and in public statements is Trump. He has become sort of the living embodiment of Trump derangement syndrome among the bishops. And that's not a nice thing to say, but I would love to hear.
But isn't that his job? Isn't that why he was appointed? I mean, that's the speculation, of course. That's why he's there.
I'd like to hear someone who is as articulate and intelligent and as good of a communicator as Cardinal Robert McElroy is, to start giving a lecture series on the real presence and why Catholics should believe in the real presence, because that's actually a much bigger problem than I don't know, helping facilitate people breaking the law by entering the country who then apostatize in large numbers. I mean, if you look at the numbers of what happens when people migrate to the United States from South and Central America, they become Protestants or they leave the faith. They leave Christianity altogether. So I don't know what it is they're doing other than money, because the bishops have to know this. They had the numbers on the Eucharist belief both before we did. So they have to know that most of the people we're talking about apostatize. And even if they didn't, there's an interview I went over, or an article I went over in one of my videos this week on this, where the investigator had been in Central America and had spoken to a Catholic who was trying to get into, who was Venezuelan trying to get into Ecuador. And he was going through the legal process. And he asked him, have you ever entered Ecuador illegally? And the guy was appalled. He's like, I'm a Catholic. I would never break the laws of a country to enter it. And I'm like, that's the correct answer, because the government, the lawful government, has every right to determine who can and who cannot enter a country and the mechanisms for entering.
Right.
The Catholics who work in the government can work to change those laws to make them easier to help the poor and then actual refugees enter in. But in general, the church has taught forever, going back to long before the modern nation state ever existed, that the secular authorities have the right to determine who can be part of the political body. Was never controversial until globalism. For whatever reason, the bishops are on the side of the globalists. And globalism is a false gospel. There is only one global society, and that is the Catholic Church. Have they forgotten this? It's the only one.
St. Paul never advocated for slaves to be set free. St. Paul never advocated for all peoples that live within the Roman Empire to become citizens, but he was happy to use his benefit as a Roman citizen to his advantage, but didn't say, but you got to let these people be citizens too. I mean, that was never a thing, but apparently today it is. You know, you just reminded me that sort of the hypocrisy. I go to a traditional Latin Mass parish, the FSSP, and often people who don't go to a traditional parish will think that all we do is talk about Vatican II or the Pope or politics, but we almost, like, our homilies are almost never about those things. They're about pursuing virtue, growing in holiness, and living and learning the traditions of Holy Mother Church. But often the reverse can be true, like Cardinal McElroy being an example of this. You almost never hear about the tradition and patrimony of Holy Mother Church. You hear about politics all the time. Don't you find that strange?
I do. I've been to Mass with both the SSPX and the FSSP almost exclusively for the last, 7, 8 years or something. And I have heard a homily about Vatican II once or twice from the SSPX. I haven't been to Mass with the SSPX in years, but most of the time, even with them, you were just hearing about the gospel reading of the day, or or the saint of the day somehow tied to it, and about sin and the 4 last things. And the FSSP, you watch their masses side by side, you wouldn't know the difference, right? It's always about the faith.
Yeah, exactly.
Just about one of the most memorable political homilies I ever heard was at an FSSP parish, but it was right after the McCarrick report came out, and the priest was very upset about it. He gave a homily reminding people about how there's a lot of souls on the line with this, and what in the world are they thinking in Rome? Under the context, it's understandable why he gave that homily. It's also amazing that he did, because he's an FSSP priest, and famously, they tend to get canceled when they do those things, even by bishops that you wouldn't think would do that to them.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here, because you don't want to miss anything.